I'm Riley Rees. This is the Sophia Unfiltered podcast where we bring together thought leaders, wellness entrepreneurs, makers, and emerging health leaders. We're here to have raw, unfiltered conversations because sharing your stories has the power to change lives, help others heal, and transform the way we take care of ourselves. Here we go. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. It's your host, Riley Rees. Today, Michelle and I sit down with our very special guest, Dr. Sheila Patel. For those of you who don't know Dr. Sheila yet, she's the Chief Medical Officer for Chopra Global. And in case that name is familiar to you, that's right, she works with Deepak Chopra and the team at Chopra Global. She's also one of Deepak Chopra's lead educators in meditation, Ayurvedic lifestyle, yoga, and coaching. Dr. Patel is also a board-certified family physician and has run her practice in Southern California for the last 15 years. Dr. Patel believes that the best way to achieve wellness is to integrate all of the knowledge available to us from both modern conventional medicine as well as from traditional healing systems. She hopes that by confirming the benefits of the practices and sharing that knowledge, more people will gain access to these life-enhancing techniques and learn how to implement them into their lives for optimal mind, body, spirit well-being. So tune in as Sheila shares her path to becoming a physician and what inspired her to explore Ayurveda. And guys, if you're unfamiliar with Ayurveda and its terminology, I suggest looking up Ayurveda Doshas. Sheila's going to elaborate on how she incorporates Ayurvedic principles into her practice, utilizing the understanding of her patients' Vata, Kapha, or Pitta constitutions to better assist them. Well, welcome, Dr. Sheila Patel. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Yeah, really excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for being here. And to just jump right in, for those of our listeners who do not know you, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and your story and how you got into the medical field, and where should we start?
My story is a little convoluted. I took lots of twists and turns along the way, but it got me exactly, where I am happy being. So I started my path. I'm beginning to understand I was one of the lucky ones who knew fairly early on I wanted to be a doctor. I actually, as I reflect on it now, I remember even before I understood what that meant, I felt like I wanted to help people and to relieve suffering. I remember seeing things on TV when I was very young, and like it really, I wouldn't have been able to describe it then, but I have this visceral response to seeing people suffer and just this desire to reduce suffering. And, then it kind of evolved into, what do you want to do? I want to help people. And then it evolved into, I'm good at science and I like thinking about, the human body. And so medicine seemed like a natural path for me. And it really was. I just had that goal in mind and studied and worked hard. And I always wanted to, again, come from this place of how do you relieve suffering? So in the case of medicine, it was how do you prevent disease? How do you help people feel good? And so I chose family medicine as my path. And I did a residency and board certified in family medicine. It's been 28 years or something since, I started practicing. And then I got out and started practicing. And I also loved the model of really knowing my patient, because there's so much more to people than just lab work and imaging. And I appreciated that what's happening in their life can very much affect their health. And I loved the model. I worked in very small towns. After residency, I'm from Wisconsin. So I did undergrad and medical school in Wisconsin. If people are from the Midwest, they may hear my little accent, maybe. I've lost a little bit of it. But then I did residency in California, Southern California, but then moved to Alaska for 4 years to a very small fishing village, community for 4 years, and then back to Wisconsin to a rural small town and practiced the type of medicine that you don't get to experience that often anymore unless you're in a rural community. Got to deliver babies and take care of my patients when they were in the hospital. I knew their families. I had to take turns running the ER as well. So I really saw the whole spectrum of disease. And then as the people's primary care physician, they would come back to me in the office and say, how did that happen? How do I prevent that from happening again? And over about 10 or 12 years in very conventional medicine, I realized we can do amazing things. And so I absolutely don't want to let go of, any of the good things that we can do. But I realized we're really treating symptoms. We're helping people get out of emergency acute situations. And then I didn't really have a lot of answers for how do I prevent this? How did this happen? And I just didn't like that. And then around that same time, this was late 90s, early 2000, integrative medicine and a lot of other holistic sorts of ideas in medicine were starting to take shape. They'd always been around, but integrative medicine was starting to be a little bit more formalized. And so I would go to conferences and just expanded my, what I had learned in medical school. I expanded my idea of what health is, of, chronic disease and treating the root cause and treating each person, not as a disease, but as a person. And it just really filled in a lot of the blanks for me. And then on top of that, my parents are from India. So I was familiar with the traditional medical system called Ayurveda. And Ayurveda is made up of two words. It's just like in medicine, a lot of words come from Latin. In Ayurvedic medicine, the words come from an ancient language called Sanskrit. And so Ayus means life and Veda means knowledge or wisdom. So or science, you can translate it. So it's the science of life. And I kind of knew of it as little home remedies and things my mom would do to help us when we were sick or to help our digestion. But I didn't understand it as a complete medical system that it is. And so at that point in my career, I started learning more about a lot of different traditional healing systems, but I really focused on Ayurveda because, again, it filled in a lot of the blanks that I had, from my conventional training. So at that point, I just decided to put more attention on learning more about Ayurveda. I moved back to California and associated with the Chopra Center, which was started by Deepak Chopra and David Simon, who are both physicians. Deepak's written a lot of books in mind-body medicine and other things like consciousness and quantum, biology. And Dr. Simon was a neurologist, both conventionally trained, but also appreciated the wisdom from traditional healing systems. So I did some certifications. I got certified in meditation, in yoga, which again are really just practices that we can bring into our day-to-day lives to help activate our own healing ability that we do have. So that's really gotten me to where I am now. Along the way, I've been working with the Chopra organization now for 14 years, and have been the chief medical officer. We've done research on many of these practices, and I teach in our certification programs through the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, IIN, and Chopra. We've partnered to, deliver our certifications. So yeah, lots of twists and turns along the way, but that's, believe it or not, the short story.
Were your parents like, oh, Sheila, we've been telling you this stuff your whole life, and now you wait till after medical school?
Yeah, I luckily my parents, especially my mom, interestingly, really always knew. Yeah, I know. Yes, because her experience was that these things do help us. She didn't need the science behind it. She didn't, worry that people thought it was woo-woo. She was very supportive of that. And my dad was as well, although he was an engineer and he trained in here. He had come to America to do his master's degree. And, a lot of us, myself included, as we go along in Western training, we become very reductionist, very material oriented, and science, is there proof of this and proof of that? And proof can come in many different ways, right? But there are only particular ways that were, considered adequate or correct in the past. And so, and it was still considered a little bit woo-woo not too long ago to talk about some of these things. And so I think there was also a little concern, oh my gosh, you went to medical school and you got all this training and, is that going to, impact how people, look at you and think of you? And of course I had the same concerns as well, that you feel like you're leaving medicine or you're doing something very alternative or crazy. But because my lived experience was that I just saw people getting better, I had all these more tools to help people, and just all the different healing practitioners that I met along the way and hearing about their stories, you just learn that you can integrate this with what we do in modern medicine, use traditional healing practices to help prevent disease, to feel better, to treat symptoms that we don't have good treatments for in Western medicine, or, really just treat lots of things that people maybe don't want to take medications for or are having side effects for. So along the way, I realized, you don't have to give up medicine to what you do is you just expand your toolbox. You expand your definitions of things. You expand your understanding of human biology. And I think you can be more effective as a healer, as a doctor, as a health practitioner.
So I think a lot of our listeners at this point are like, okay, I'm in. Tell me what it is. How do I do it? How do I start practicing it? And I think you said Ayurveda is the science of life. So what does that mean? And
yeah, that's the literal translation. But, Ayurveda is like saying medicine. It involves this whole philosophy and structure of how we can heal and how we can use our own healing ability to support whatever else, even medicines that we're taking. So it really describes not just our own biology, but how everything in nature functions and that we're part of nature. So we can look to nature, we can appreciate our connection to the rhythms of nature. And now we're appreciating that to be biological rhythms, science around circadian rhythms, how things in our bodies function differently in the morning versus at night, just like in nature. We can just look outside, and a lot of those rhythms are reflected in us. And so Ayurveda is really a system of medicine. So there are many, many different practices that you can incorporate into what we would call an Ayurvedic lifestyle. I also like to call it the original lifestyle medicine. Now there's a lot of attention being paid on lifestyle medicine. And when you say lifestyle medicine, it includes lots of different things. And so that's like Ayurveda. It can include how you eat. It can include how you move your body, exercise and physical activity. But it also includes what time you go to bed, what time you eat your meals, what types of meals you're eating, and how you're preparing them in a way that's right for your mind-body type. So Ayurveda understands that one size doesn't fit all. So there's a system to identify different mind-body types or your natural constitution. And then you make choices that are best for your own constitution. So it's really a lot of different practices around these main pillars of well-being: sleep, which can very easily, as we know, get disrupted, nutrition, movement, emotional regulation. In Ayurveda, we not only, look at the body, but we look at what's happening in the mental space and how that might be affecting what's going on physically. And then all of the practices you do throughout the day that can, be nourishing and create health. So the other little elevator pitch I have is that Ayurveda teaches us how to create health on a daily basis by every single choice that we make. And really only one of two things can happen when we make a choice. It's either leading us in the direction of health and balance, we can also say, or it's leading us away from health and balance and more toward disease eventually. So when we kind of think about things in that way, we can look at a choice, we can understand our mind body, we can understand what we need each day, which might change day to day, and make the best choice for ourselves that leads us toward health.
Yeah. And I think I went through the Chopra training through the Ayurvedic education. And what was the most helpful for me was seeing how empowered you can be, that it really gives you the tools to bring yourself back into balance. And once you learn some principles, you don't really need to go to the doctor for every little thing. It's like, okay, let me figure out what's out of balance. And I know the tools to help myself get back into balance. And I can catch that early before it's a full-blown disorder. So I'm wondering if you could share with our listeners a little bit about those mind-body types you had mentioned earlier, and maybe, kind of when they come out of balance and what you might do to help those.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. It's very empowering. And that's one thing I've found when people start learning Ayurveda. And sometimes you need guidance, you need to educate yourself because you're talking about things in a little different way than we're used to. And it's turning us back inward. How do you feel? It's about the qualities of, do you feel heavy? Do you feel light? Are things dry? Are they moist? Is something hot or cold? And in Ayurveda, we balance with the opposite. And when I start teaching people this, and, I just point out that we're constantly doing that. This is how we do things all the time. When we're hot, we don't add fire, we don't add heat, a heating blanket. We try to cool down, we add a fan. When we're cold, we add a heating blanket or sit in front of a fire or something. So we already know when our feet are wet, we try to dry them off. When our skin is dry, we add moisture. So these basic, simple principles really kind of validate for people what they already know, right? And so it's very empowering. They start to understand, oh, that's why I feel like doing that when I feel this way. Or, oh, that's why I make choices and it has an opposite effect on me that I see it having on my best friend or my partner or my sister. And it starts to make sense of their life. And then, like you said, when you start to learn the basic principles and understand your mind body type, then you start to be able to make choices for yourself. And it's really empowering. Otherwise you just feel like, you don't know what's going on and you have to go elsewhere, to get help. So one of the main really life-changing things for people is learning their mind body type. And in Ayurveda, again, the terms that are used they represent aspects of nature. So there are these building blocks, these qualities that make up everything in nature. And so we call them the 5 elements: space, air, fire, water, earth. And again, even though that can sound somewhat esoteric, what people need to understand is those terms really represent different qualities that we experience in nature. Ayurveda is a very experiential science, an experiential medicine. So when we say space, we're talking about the qualities of space, feeling expanded, light, dry. If you think about being in space, there's potential. When you have a space, there's the potential for anything to happen in that space. So that term really means the potential, like within a space, and all of the qualities, in space. Air represents movement. So we can sometimes refer to that as wind. So when there's movement and wind, that is an aspect, even to our physiology, it's an aspect of nature. We see movement everywhere. In our bodies, there's movement happening: circulation, movement through the digestive tract, movement of electrical impulses through the nervous system, movement of air when we breathe. Fire represents transformation, which means like chemical reactions, things that are transforming: metabolism, digestion, detoxification. So fire represents those aspects to our physiology. Water is the lubrication, the cooling, the liquid, cohesive aspects to nature, again, within us and outside of us. And earth is matter. So it's anything we can touch and interact with. And if you think about it, nature includes all of those things, all of those qualities and all of those aspects. And so when we come into the world in the Ayurvedic, descriptions, we need to have all 5 of those qualities: space, air, fire, water, earth. But each person comes in with 1 or 2 dominant, or, some elements that are dominant in their nature. So some people come in with more of the qualities of space and air. And there's a term for that called Vata. So they're Vata types. And again, when we say Vata, all that means is people who have a lot of the qualities of air and space. And if you think about air and space, you think light, dry, cold, mobile, right? There's a lot of movement within space and air. And so how that looks as a person is someone who's naturally light, naturally thin. We know there are people who they're not necessarily trying, but they're just naturally thin and light. And they also tend to have cold hands, cold feet. They tend to move a lot. It's hard for them to sit still. Sometimes they talk really fast. Their mind moves very quickly. So when they're in balance, those qualities give them the ability to, be active and, move around and their mind can be very creative because they have all this movement in the mind. They have all these creative thoughts. They are very light on their feet. But they have a tendency, because of those qualities, to have sensitivities. They can have food sensitivities. They can have digestive sensitivities. They can have dryness in their skin, dryness in their, eyes, their hair, whatever. They can tend to be anxious even in the mind because all of those thoughts can turn into worries. So they have tendencies, but the key here is when you stay balanced, you can express all of those qualities in balance. You can be creative, you can be active, but you can still stay healthy. When they get out of balance, and in Ayurveda, we say out of balance, you accumulate too many of those elements and their qualities. So what would cause too much space and air? Too much movement. So travel, moving around too much in the day, without taking breaks, too much overstimulation, too many dry, cold foods. So if you think about all of the different things in the choices you make every day that can add dry, cold, light movement, that's going to create a Vata imbalance, is what we say. And so that, again, looks like anxiety, maybe constipation, sensitivities, and that's more of an out of balance expression of that dosha. Dosha is the word for mind-body principle or mind-body type. The second type is Pitta, and that's people who come in with more, we say, fire and water. So what that means is they have more of the qualities of fire and water. If you think about fire, it's hot, it's light, there's some movement there. But when you bring in the water component, it's not quite as light as air and space, right? So that keeps the fire cool. There's even, if you think about heat and water, there's like an oiliness, there's moisture. So pittas, as opposed to vatas who are very dry and cold, they're the ones who feel hot, when everyone else is cold in the room, they're hot. Because of that fire, they have really good digestion. So they can just eat whatever and digest it really quickly and really well. They tend to be more medium build. So they have more muscle tone than like a thin, light Vata type. And their skin can be a little moister or oilier. And they have a tendency to accumulate too much heat. A Pitta tends to be very goal oriented. And so they tend to have a lot of projects and goals that they're trying to get to. And so they can be workaholics. They can overdo lots of things. They can even overexercise, overindulge in things. And when they do, they get out of balance. And that can show up as irritability, anger, frustration in the mind. In the body, it can be inflammation, indigestion, acidity, ulcers, oiliness, oily skin, many different things. So, again, this in Ayurveda, we sort of look at the symptoms and we can know what principles or doshas are out of balance and then offer the opposite to try to treat that. So the last mind body type is Kapha. That's people who come in with more qualities of water and earth. And those are the heavier elements, right? Water and earth. If you think about water and earth together, it's like mud. So it's heavier, it's smooth, it's soft, it's slow. So, mud moves, but much slower than air, or fire and water. And so those are the qualities of those people. They tend to be a little slower to get going, but they have a lot of stamina. I always tell people it's like getting a boulder moving. It takes a little energy, but then once it gets going, it can really keep going. So Kaphas tend to have a lot of stamina. They tend to be a little bit have more soft tissue around the joints, I like to say, because I'm a Kapha type. So we can be very healthy at a heavier weight than a Vata or a Pitta, a little more soft tissue, but still very healthy and strong. And in the mind, more, again, cool and calm, a little bit more grounded, again, these qualities of water and earth. But out of balance, because Kapha types don't have that natural movement, they tend to be more sedentary. They like to be still. But too much stillness, not enough movement, what happens is I tell people that mud turns into cement. So they get overweight, lethargic, maybe depressed, unmotivated, just blah. And that can lead to fluid retention, again, weight gain, bloating, maybe, so different symptoms when they get out of balance. And so when you understand someone's mind body type, or when someone understands their mind body type, they can make choices every day that keep themselves in balance. And you can see when you're bringing in the opposite, that what's right for one person may be the opposite, for someone else to stay healthy. So when people start learning about the doshas and learning about their mind body type, it starts to make complete sense of their life and their life experience. So it's really fun when people start learning about all of it.
And I know some of our listeners are probably ticking off some of those descriptions like, well, that one's me, that one's me. But what if they see themselves in all three of these? I mean, it would make sense because you said we have all five of these elements. Do you guys at Chopra still have that quiz online where you can find out your dosha?
Yes. So there are objective ways to try to figure out what someone's mind body type is. So we do have a quiz on chopra.com. I believe it's chopra.com/dosha quiz. And it's 10 simple questions that you can answer about what your natural tendencies are over most of your life. Because we have all five elements, we all have all three of the doshas. We need to have all of those functions and qualities within us. It's just that everybody has one or two. Sometimes people are bi-dosha, we call it, where they have two of those mind-body principles that are high in their physiology. And so when you take the quiz, it'll kind of tell you what proportion of each of the doshas you have within you. You can't only have one or two. We have all three, as you said. But you'll have a predominance of one or two. And all that means is those are the things that are going to show up in your mind and body tendencies. And so if two of those descriptions sound a lot like you, then that probably means you're bi-dosha. So you could be a Vata Pitta or a Pitta Kapha, or one of those could be very much describe you very well. Then you may have a predominance of that single dosha. And it's very interesting because in Ayurveda, we're just describing what we observe. And now when people are starting to look at genes and genetics, right? And we know people have different genes and their genetic tendencies, right? So this is an emerging science, but we're starting to realize when people have certain gene mutations or certain clusters of genes, that shows up as different patterns of digestion, of personality, of skin types, etc. And there are people that are researching and looking at, is there a correlation between certain gene patterns and what we describe in Ayurveda? And of course there is, because Ayurveda is just describing what we observe as, physiology and, the mind body. So it's really fascinating. But this, again, gives us a very subjective way to figure ourselves out.
Riley, do you hear yourself in any of those doshas? Because if not, I want Dr. Sheila to help you figure out what your dosha is.
I am pretty sure, and I just pulled up descriptions as well. And I know you already called this out for me too, but I wish we even knew percentages, but I'm straight Vata Pitta. I mean, just to the letter. Vata
that was
Pitta.
going to be my guess. But yeah.
You can see me moving, right here, but it's just Vata Pitta. And I just pulled this article up quickly, and it also talks about weaknesses. I mean, sleep issues, impatient, shocking, right? Tenacious. I mean, so it's hit the nail on the head, but it's just so interesting on here's how you should manage your stress. And here's, I'm always cold. I hate being cold. And it's talking about, always wanting warm food. It's very interesting. And I did not know that this was part of it. It's interesting.
Yeah. Another analogy I use with people is, because again, we're just describing patterns of nature, and by nature, patterns of human behavior and physiology. We say psychophysiology because mind and body are connected. When the mind is stressed, the body's going to show the stress response. When the mind is calm, the body's typically, has the mechanisms that go toward rest and digest. We call it healing. But with Ayurveda, I often tell people, because it's just describing patterns of nature, think about it as someone who studies plants. We look at patterns of behavior. We feel it, we look at it. So if there's a plant that has thick, waxy leaves, it doesn't, it thrives in dry weather. It, doesn't need a lot of water. We just give that a name. We call it a succulent, right? So this is the same thing we're doing, like that Ayurveda is just using terminology to describe this is a certain pattern of how humans show up, right? And then we know, oh, this plant needs less water. If I overwater it, that won't be good. This plant needs more sun, this plant, and so again, as people, it helps us understand how to do I need more of this or less of this, and what's going to help me thrive. So, I think when I start using analogies like that, and even, reflecting these qualities and how they show up in nature, it starts to make more sense for people.
Yeah. And I think too, you can have a dosha, but be out of balance with a different dosha. So when I first came to the Chopra Center, I was Vata imbalanced. I was anxious. I wasn't sleeping, just couldn't land. Come to find out that my dosha is Pitta Kapha. It's not even Vata. But I was so out of balance with the Vata. And I remember you told me, Sheila, in terms of sleeping, you're like, you're not going to like this, but no screens 2 hours before bed. You're like, you're not going to like this. I know you're going to fight me on this. Everybody does. But your prescription to me was no screens. I'm sure there's more. So I would love for you to tell our listeners if they're noticing that Vata imbalance, which is super common, especially this time of year. The antidote. So you said no screens. You said increase your meditations to twice daily, ideally one like couple hours before bed. And then you had prescribed an herbal remedy for me. And I was sleeping within 2 days. I was like, okay. And of course, then I tested. I'm like, oh, screen time an hour before. Oh, screen time 20 minutes before. Oh, screen time right before bed. And then I'm like, crap, I can't sleep. Okay, go back to the beginning.
All the Vata Pittas need to hear this in general, right? Vata during the Vata season. We need to hear what you have to say.
Exactly. No, I'm so glad you brought that up and shared your personal story, because it brings up a lot of great points. As you mentioned earlier, we have all of the doshas in us. We have space, air, fire, water, earth, and all the qualities we have to exist. So what that means is any of the doshas can get out of balance. Any of those qualities can accumulate. We tend to get out of balance often with our primary doshas. For instance, I'm a kapha, and I tend to be more sedentary, and I tend to, again, have certain qualities about my digestion where it's, not that strong. It's a little sluggish. So I tend to, gain weight easier, or I tend to get a little, unmotivated, et cetera, all the kapha things. So on a daily basis, I try to keep that balance by a little bit of movement in the morning, by trying to eat more light, dry foods, et cetera. But as you mentioned, depending on your life choices and your life experiences, what's coming into your senses, any of the doshas can get out of balance in anyone. So in addition to that, because Vata by nature is mobile and not very grounded, it's the easiest one to get out of balance. So for anyone, we can have the anxiety, the sleep issues, the digestive issues, the sensitivities. When we have, and again, the other thing in Ayurveda, Vata is correlated to the nervous system. So when our nervous system is overstimulated, and that means screen time, sometimes that means, too much noise, right? And our modern life, there's so much overstimulation. There's so much visual overstimulation. There's so much noise all the time. There's, movement, like we're constantly going here, going there. That's basically a prescription for Vata, or the setup for Vata imbalance. So the prescription we would recommend is bringing in the opposite. Slow down, less movement, take a few things off your things that you signed up for. And then, and again, the prescription can be different for each person. And that's the great thing about Ayurveda. As long as you're bringing in the qualities of slowing things down, grounding, calmness, then it can mean many different practices. So for you, again, and for many people, reducing the stimulation, the screen time, but it can also involve eating warmer, more cooked foods because they're more grounding, and the warm is good. It can mean grounding, like walking outside, putting your bare feet on the earth, that you feel grounded. It can mean, again, having a regular routine, eating at the same time every day, going to bed at the same time, and waking up. Whenever we have a regular, consistent routine, our nervous system actually calms down because it feels more stable, right? It can mean a warm oil massage before bed. That's another really life-changing Ayurvedic practice for a lot of people. When you use a little bit of warm oil, even just on the bottom of your feet and on your scalp and ears, people come back to me and they say, oh my gosh, that was life-changing. Now I'm never going to stop doing my oil massage at night. Why? Oil is moist. Oil is heavy. So it's the opposite of dry and light, right? So it's very grounding. Doing some deep breathing before bed is one of the best things you can do to help, sleep. It calms down when you slow down your breath. And it can be something simple like breathe in for 5 seconds, breathe out for 5 seconds. It slows down the mind. It calms the nervous system. And there are all kinds of studies on this. People have been researching. You see breathing practices everywhere now because there's a direct correlation and fairly immediately of how it calms down the nervous system. So I tell people do 5 or 10 minutes of slow, deep breathing before bed. And, as for you, reduce the overstimulation, especially right before bed. And sometimes, again, Ayurveda has a huge pharmacopoeia of herbs that can be used to help, with various things. Now, the other thing, this is Vata imbalance. And Vata, again, in our modern world, is very easy for anyone to get out of balance because, again, we do tend to move a lot. We're overstimulated constantly. Pitta imbalance can come from overdoing, like being too focused, too like pushing ourselves too hard, no pain, no gain, kind of like really what we've been taught, in this modern time is like, just keep working, keep pushing. And you can have too much activity and not enough rest. And so when you have too much activity, you're overdoing. So fill in the blank, overworking, over, drinking, overeating, over doing something too much, overthinking even. That gets the mind just going. And then it's hard to sleep sometimes too. So Vata Pittas can have a double whammy there and have issues sleeping. It can be just too many hot, spicy foods. Again, what is it? And that's part of what we do as Ayurvedic practitioners is try to find the root cause. Because 2 different people could have a different reason for why their pitta is out of balance. For one person, it could be just they're eating too many spicy and oily foods. For another person, it could be they're working into the evening hours and not, shutting down their mind. For someone else, it could be they're doing their exercise in the middle of the day when it's hot out. And then they're wondering why they have rashes and, inflammation. So anything where you're overdoing it or you're adding too much heat can cause a pitta imbalance. And then kapha imbalance is from heavy, cold, and slow, right? Sedentary lifestyle, heavy foods, like a lot of our processed foods and a lot of kind of food that, and eating too much earth and water. And then we're sedentary is like a setup for kapha imbalance. So that's why we see a lot of, weight issues. A lot of it has to do with, and that can be any dosha, right? I see Vata Pittas, Pitta Kaphas who have weight gain. And sometimes, again, it's because they're too sedentary. So then I prescribe movement. Sometimes it's because they're eating too much throughout the day and even in between meals. They're not letting their digestion and their digestive fire, we have a term for that, Agni, fire. They're not letting it build up so that they can digest the next meal. So then I would prescribe, the prescription involves more food recommendations, and so again, any of the doshas can get out of balance in anyone. And the job of each person is to figure out what's causing that and what can I do to balance that.
We hope you enjoyed learning about doshas and how they can help give you insight and awareness into your well-being. Stay tuned for part 2 of our episode where Dr. Sheila will dive into the science behind Ayurveda, various Ayurvedic practices, and ways to integrate Ayurveda into your daily life. We'll see you next week. Thanks so much for listening. This has been Sophia Unfiltered, a podcast by Sophia Health, the #1 marketplace for health and wellness. Find services, classes, and products from the top health and wellness providers. Book an appointment or join live classes now. I'm your host, Riley Rees. If this episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear about it in the comments section of your favorite podcast provider or with a 5-star rating. Let us know what your biggest takeaway from this episode was, or share it with someone you hope to inspire. Join us again next time for more real conversations, stories, and insights that help empower you with the knowledge and inspiration needed to transform how we care for ourselves.